There are plenty of ambitious characters in Shakespeare's Tempest. The entire plot is built on the premise that one man's ambition for power led to the expulsion of his brother, and now that brother's ambition for revenge has brought them all to a magical island. Prospero both wants to return to power and to earn the responsibility that power entails. Caliban wants his freedom to populate the island with workers like himself who will cultivate the land. Stefano and Trinculo aspire to the freedoms of the aristocracy and the bottle. Some people aspire to positions of power in order to bring peace and liberate others, while some aspire to positions of power simply to be in power. The play questions the ambitions of all these characters, and, as always, we're left with a lot of ambiguity. In this video essay, we're going to go through those ambiguities in The Tempest by reading through Act 2. And if this sounds like your kind of thing, please subscribe to watch more videos about The Tempest and other Shakespeare plays. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Act 2 begins with Gonzalo, Antonio, Sebastian, and Adrian discussing, or perhaps more appropriately arguing, about the nature of their condition stranded on this island. Gonzalo begins this bit by saying that they should be grateful that they were saved, but their conversation quickly moves to the nature of the island, which they all seem to agree appears deserted. It's a blank canvas that they can each interpret differently. Adrian seems to side with Gonzalo in perceiving their situation optimistically. He says that the air breathes upon us here most sweetly. But Sebastian and Antonio view the situation much more cynically, saying of that same air that the island seems as if it had lungs, and rotten ones. Those two, Sebastian and Antonio, act like annoying children through this entire scene, constantly commenting on the speech of others as though they can't hear. They're very unlikable. One thing to pay attention to as we read is that this play treats those who appreciate the island more sympathetically than those who dislike the island. Sebastian, Antonio, Stefano, and Trinculo all find the island hostile, while Prospero, Gonzalo, and Ferdinand feel the wind sweetly. Those who are open to some sort of rebirth on the island will be changed by it, as Prospero has, while those who are not open to that possibility, like Sebastian, will not be changed by it. Notably, Caliban appreciates the island, so if this pattern holds true, that might change the way that we interpret the ending, particularly the ending for Caliban, but that's for a later video. Anyway, during this discussion, we learn that this group has been traveling back from Tunis, where they attended the marriage of Alonso's daughter, Claribel. Apparently Alonso, the king of Naples, has married his daughter to the king of Tunis. Interestingly, we learn about this marriage between Claribel and Tunis in a scene directly after we witness Prospero arrange a marriage between his daughter and Alonso's son. Two fathers, Alonso and Prospero, using their daughters as pawns in a political game. This is a classic Shakespearean move. Double a situation so that the audience compares the two. So let's do that. When discussing Claribel's marriage, Sebastian tells us, using some fairly racist rhetoric, that everyone asked Alonso not to marry his daughter to an African king. Even Claribel, the fair soul herself, weighed between loathness and obedience, and yet Alonso forced it to happen anyway. Prospero, on the other hand, schemes to manufacture consent from his daughter by having Ferdinand appear on the island. And then, just to make sure he has her enthusiastic consent, he puts up some obstacles for her to work through in order to marry the man that he wants her to marry anyway. Importantly, he wants Miranda to want this for herself. Both fathers want to exploit their daughters for political ambitions. Only one seeks to provoke his daughter's consent there. And obviously, this is not the only case of doubling going on in the scene. Sebastian and Antonio conspire to usurp and kill Alonso and Gonzalo. A brother, Sebastian, seeks to eliminate a ruler in order to be the ruler. And this is exactly what happened to Prospero. Antonio attempts to recreate this coup from 12 years ago by having Sebastian replace Alonso in Naples. He wants the evil brother to usurp the virtuous brother, just as he had. Or maybe that's the wrong way of looking at this. Stay with me here, but maybe Prospero is the one looking to recreate that coup here. Think about it. Prospero has Ariel put the king and Gonzalo to sleep. Prospero is in control. 12 years ago, he failed to control the situation in Milan when Antonio successfully organized his usurpation. But this time, he maintains much better control and wakes Alonso up just in time to prevent it. Maybe this is symbolic of Prospero's regeneration. He gave up control last time, but this time he maintains it. The other interesting bit to note about this scene and the attempted coup is that it illustrates Sebastian and Antonio's ambitions for power. Before Alonso and Gonzalo sleep, Gonzalo dreams about what he would do if he were king of such an island. He could start a nation from absolutely nothing, from scratch. He imagines a utopian land of equality, all men idle, all, and women too, but innocent and pure, no sovereignty. A land with no riches or poverty. No one would need to work because nature would bring forth of its own kind all foison, all abundance to feed my innocent people. In other words, he wants to be king of an area with no kings. He wants authority to create a world with no authority. He envisions a world without inequality and suffering. Maybe he's naive, or maybe he just sees the best in people. Maybe as a counselor, he sees his position of authority as self-subverting in the same way that Prospero's role as teacher is self-subverting. If he counsels well, there will be no need for a leader anymore. Either way, Gonzalo's desire to rule over a land with no rulers is starkly contrasted with the cynicism of Antonio. Gonzalo has a vision. He wants to eliminate the hierarchies that oppress people. He wants to subvert the foundations of authority. Antonio seems to want power for power's sake. He doesn't try to convince Sebastian to kill his brother so that he can implement some sort of meaningful policies. He convinces Sebastian to kill his brother simply so that he can be king. For Antonio, desire for power is its own end. And at this point, I should mention that Gonzalo's optimistic speech is nearly a word-for-word quotation from an essay by Michel de Montaigne. Michel de Montaigne, if you're unaware, was a French essayist, the original essayist, whose work was translated into English in 1603. Shakespeare, similar to literally everybody that's ever tried to read Montaigne, is a fan and places these lines in the mouth of Gonzalo, who, in a lot of ways, seems to be the moral center of this play, even if he's a bit naive or overly hopeful at times. The general point of Montaigne's original essay is that Europeans called indigenous people savages, but he took a look around France during his time and realized that the so-called civilized Europeans acted pretty savagely towards each other. So, what even is civilization? What does being, quote, civilized do to our ambition? The implication here is that it corrupts. Civilized Antonio desires to occupy positions of power rather than to desire the dismantling of those positions and the oppressions that they facilitate. So Gonzalo and Montaigne see the type of ambition represented by Antonio as a toxic and uniquely European phenomenon. It's the product of greed and a political system detached from nature. The quote Shakespeare gives Gonzalo in this scene notably comes from an essay entitled Of Cannibals. 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 Calibans? If being civilized means being like Antonio, what does that mean to a, quote, savage like Caliban? Anyway, let's move on to scene 2, where we see Caliban articulating his desire to hurt Prospero, even though he knows Prospero's spirits can hear him. His opening speech in this scene aligns his character with the earth, the island, and nature generally. Even though we know that he came here along with his mother when he was young, it seems like he's the closest thing this island has to a native community. And in Act 2, Scene 2, he encounters two working-class characters, Trinculo, a fool, and Stefano, a butler. It doesn't take very long before he quickly aligns himself with these two over Prospero. Notably, instead of swearing his allegiance on a Bible, Caliban swears it on a bottle of wine. He's traded in subjugation to Prospero for subjugation to Stefano. Caliban will still do all the labor, but this time it's in service to silliness rather than political ambition. And to be fair, it does seem like more fun. They don't have much interest in working. Their ambitions seem to be limited to drinking wine and hanging out. So Caliban has, in this way, united the workers against management, and they sing and drink their way off stage. Which will take us to Act 3, which we'll go through play-by-play in the next video. Please subscribe to be notified when that comes out. And for future seasons of Shakespeare Play-by-Play, thank you for watching.